Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Thomas H. Johnson edition. We turn out to poem 779, The Service Without Hope. Now, in many ways, we're going to have to speculate about what service it is that we're talking about here. Some of you will maybe think, this is the service to humanity, or the service that might be qualified as a religious service or a civic service. Ruth Miller, and I'm going to follow her. On this one. Miller has made the argument that Emily's writing about poetry. That in fact, this is the service that she's talking about is the very service of poetry itself. And Christine Miller has made some very important comments about this that I'm hopeful I can share with you as well. Now, our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist. I'm hoping you worked through the set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 778 poems. We just finished with 778, This, That, Would, Greet. Now, in many ways, this poem is a question about motive, especially the motive or the reason for acting of an artist, a creator. Why does the creator create? In many ways, we are, of course, always going to be playing around with Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn and the question of art and the value of art. Why, for Emily, write all these poems? Yes, we are obviously almost halfway through our study here of 1,775 poems contained in the Johnson edition. Why do all this work? She'll say it this way. The service without hope is tenderest, I think, because 'tis unsustained by state. Rewarded work has impetus of gain and impetus of goal. There is no diligence like that knows not an until. Now, of course, she loves to play games, language games. For example, the word until here, using an adverb to make it a noun. We'll see this in 925, a spontaneous peradventure. We'll see the same game being played again. Notice we begin with the idea of the service. It is capitalized. In other words, the work that she is doing. Well, what work is it she does? Well, obviously she does her domestic duties, like making bread, which apparently she was really good at. Her daddy liked her bread the best. However, it's pretty clear she's not talking about making bread or cooking a meal. The service, notice here, without hope. Now, you'll remember that we've already commented on this word. It's a key word for Emily. She uses this word hope in 33 of her poems. You'll remember 254, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could have bashed the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest lands and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Now, that will be interesting because in this poem, she's going to make the argument that the poet should live without asking a crumb. That is to say, working without gain, working without goal. When we get to 1547, we'll come back to this use of this word hope. Hope is a subtle glutton. He feeds upon the fair, and yet, inspected closely, what abstinence is there? His is the halcyon table that never seats but one, and whatsoever is consumed, the same amount remain. We'll see it one more time in 1392 as well. Hope is a strange invention, a patent of the heart, in unremitting action, yet never wearing out. Of this electric adjunct, not anything is known, but its unique momentum embellish all we own. We live with some sense of hope, and yet in this poem she says, the most important artist is the one who works services without hope, without the until, without the goal of getting something back. Then she uses the word tenderest. Now, it's the only time that actual word is used, although, of course, tender we're familiar with. You'll remember this one from 441, this is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. What's the final line we commented on? Judge tenderly of me. She says, I think it's the best to work, serve, without hope or some sense of reward. She says, I think. Of course, this phrasing of I think is significant in her poetry. We'll see it in 24 of her poems, I think. Because 'tis unsustained. You'll remember unsustained from 444, though those unsustained saviors. Unsustained by stent. You'll remember this use of the word stent in our study of 771. In other words, by the absence of it. There is a break that one must read, by the way, at this point, so if you want to make that mark in your volume. Then she'll say it. Rewarded work, by the way, we'll get to reward in poem 781. Rewarded work has impetus of gain. By the way, this idea of impetus takes us to 770. Has impetus of gain and impetus of goal. In other words, if work is rewarded, then we're always looking for what we can gain and our goals in that work. She says, there is no diligence. By the way, notice diligence capitalized. Like that knows not an until. It is, I think, significant that the argument she's making is that at 2a, the greatest artists work for only the sake of that art. There's no gain. There is no reward. Now, Christine Miller, the scholar, she said this so brilliantly that I just want to quote from her classic, A Poet's Grammar. Most of one's life, I'm not quoting Miller, most of one's life, this poem suggests, is lived within the boundaries of motivation and impetus, of hope, gain, goal, such as that represented by the normal use of function words, whether temporal, before, after, as soon as, or logical, in order to, because of, so. The poem praises, in contrast, action that is performed solely for its own benefit. Linguistically represented, such action entails that its actor know no function words. One acts without impetus only insofar as one never has cause to attach such relation or functional qualifiers to meaning, as long as one thinks and acts purely in absolutes. The normalization of until objectifies this state and thereby dramatizes the possibility of banning such a functional concept from the speaker's vocabulary, and hence mind, as clearly as one bans an object from one's life. Now, to speak in terms of level 2b, I think we'll come back to Miller. She finishes her treatment this way. Yet, the abundant function words of the poem, the repetitions and internal rhymes, sustained, stent, impetus, impetus, that, no, knows, not, until, diligence, until, the repeated negatives, without, unsustained, no, not, and the complex syntax suggests that knowing no until is a difficult and delicate, perhaps impossible task. The connecting repetitions and rhymes of the poem and the apparent impossibility of presenting any thought or action without marking its relation to other thought and action implies that an until invariably lingers in hope behind every service, whether the server recognizes it or not. And then she finishes, understanding requires the ability to draw connections, which of course is the way we define learning in room 303. Yes, that desire to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. At 3a, well, of course, we could think about our study of Wordsworth's Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey, where he makes the argument that it's what? Little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love that are going to make a great life. But I like to think about our study of the Bhagavad Gita, especially Book 2. You'll remember, you have the right to work, but for the work's sake only. You have no right to the fruits of your labor. Desire for the fruits must never be your motive in working. Never give way to laziness. Either that passage ends. Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this, what was a time in your life when you worked, but only for the sense of the work? You created, but only for the sense of the creation. And no reward, no goal, no gain. Thank you.